Good morning, everyone. Oh, come on. We've got more coffee in the back. We can work on this. I think there are even some pastries back there if anyone needs some sustenance. So there are plenty of chairs up front and all over the place. Raise your hand if there's a chair next to you for folks who are coming in. Come on up. Leave the chairs in the back open for folks who come late, if you would. Y'all come on up. Chairs up front. Raise your hands again. I know, we're going to just keep doing this for a few minutes. So, welcome. Landing your first investor. We are focused on angel investing for your first investor, and I'm sure some of what you learn here can be applicable for venture capital as well. I'm Claire England. I'm Executive Director of Central Texas Angel Network, and here with me I have 4 of our active investors. And when I talk about active investors, I mean people who are actually writing checks. There are plenty of angel investors who maybe aren't writing checks at one time or another. I only want to put in front of entrepreneurs people who are active angel investors. So I think that's an important distinction when you're talking to investors. Find out if they're active right now. So I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves. While they are all members of CTAN, Central Texas Angel Network, we are not here to necessarily talk a lot about CTAN unless you have questions about our process. We're here to more directly give you a chance to hear from each one of these folks on their personal perspective on angel investing and how they go about it, and answer any and all questions you have. So this is more of an Ask Me Anything format. Hope you brought your energy. If you didn't, go get that coffee or pastry, and let's ask lots of questions today, because I want you to stump the investors up here. I think that's part of the fun, right? And we have some who are a little bit tired from late nights or recent travels, so keep them awake. Let's ask them good questions. And folks who are standing in the back, there are lots of seats. Come on up, there are lots of open seats. All right, so I'm going to start over on this side and have each of our investors very briefly introduce themselves and tell you kind of their focus areas with their angel investing.
Oh, push the button, everybody. Hi, I'm Kelsey August. I'm a serial entrepreneur, started up many companies, bootstrapping. Currently, I'm an angel investor, have about 30 in my portfolio across all verticals, and I sit on the board at CTAN.
I'm Ryan Murdoch. I'm an orthopedic surgeon for kids in town, but got started with CTAN about 2 years ago. Just grew up with a family that was entrepreneurial and wanted to help see some companies develop and build, and so currently invested in 9 and hopefully soon to be 10 companies. Sure. It's Ryan Murdoch.
Hi, I'm Leon Shaw, and I've been with CTAN for about 3, maybe 4 years. And I'm an engineer by trade, and currently with a portfolio of about 5 or 6 companies, working to build up that first set of 10 companies for myself.
Hi, I'm John Paulus. I'm a technology background, chip design specifically. I've been an academic. I've been an engineering manager. I've been a business leader. And for the last 10 years now, I've been pretty much full-time investor. And I've done more than 40 angel investments since 2010 across all sectors, but not consumer. And I'm also on the board of CTAN. At the moment, I'm the board chair.
So I'll kick off the questioning while you guys are contemplating what you'd like to ask all these folks. Starting at this end, what is the number one factor for you? And I know there are many factors in making a decision about your angel investing, but what's the number one factor you're considering when you're first meeting with an entrepreneur? To potentially invest.
I have to like the idea first. The team matters a lot. The financials behind it matter a lot, but it's got to be a compelling idea first. So I really start there, whereas a lot of people start with the people aspect of the startup.
I would agree with John. Definitely the idea, otherwise probably wouldn't be talking. And beyond that, making an impression in that first meeting is pretty important to me as well.
What kind of impression?
I'm looking for entrepreneurs with like a lot of energy, a lot of belief in their idea, and they're able to explain what they want to do very clearly. And yeah.
Right.
So for me, it's more about the why. I really want to know why the person is pursuing this. I mean, this is a huge undertaking to be able to develop a company. The idea is important. I got to believe in the idea, but if you don't have a good reason why you're doing it, you just decided one day you want to start a company, and that's it. I'm not really going to be sold that you're going to be able to make it through to the end. So the why is the most important to me.
I'm a marketer, so I believe in the person. I like the entrepreneur because we can pivot and the idea can change.
All right, who'd like to kick us off on AMA Ask Me Anything of our members up here?
Give me one example from actual listening to an investor of something they said or did. It could be something very small or something major that said, yeah, I want to know more about them. I think I want to invest in them. And then something they did that made you think right away, no, they're not on my list.
Who'd like to take it?
Let Boss lead.
John?
I'm trying to think of an example. Yeah, I need
You got it.
All right, Ryan's going first.
Hello. I can give you an example of a no. So I was at a mentor hours, and an entrepreneur came up and pitched to me, and was working on a novel idea that had some IP along with it, but then proceeded to go off on 4 different ways that they could potentially use the product, but did not tell me the way they were going to use the product. And so for me, that was just, I want to know, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to approach it, this is the process we're going to take. And when he could not give me any specifics about which way they were going to go, I was out.
I can tell you yes. So they've got their elevator speech down. They can tell me what their valuation is. They can tell me who their team is, and they're going to tell me how to go to market. So when they have their strategy nailed, I really want to follow up with them if it meets all my 3 criteria.
For me, an example of a yes would be kind of how I got into this whole thing. It was actually a friend of mine who was pitching the idea for food delivery. This was before food delivery became, I guess, exposed. But the idea behind kind of replacing something very commonplace in the world, like cooking for yourself, making it an automated process, and seeing kind of the greater vision of the basic of an idea, that was very compelling to me.
One example of a yes is a company where they've got a software product. It's in the life sciences space, but what was compelling about the first exposure to it was that they explained how this product actually enabled the physician in the practice to make more money. And that may sound weird that that's the thing to get excited about, but a lot of pitches don't ever explain where the incentives are for the people that really have to put the product into the channel to make money with it. And there's way too much money invested in companies that actually don't have unit economics that make sense, or don't have a business model that actually generates profitable revenue. So leading off the bat with an explanation for why this product in the hands of a doctor was good for the patient but also made money for the doctor was a very compelling kind of first position.
Any no's for either of you? Examples? Are we just going to be really nice and not say the no's?
Amazing.
It's typically harder for me to pinpoint an exact no. It's if you're stumbling that badly and one thing's going to set off the whole deal, you probably didn't make it very far in the process in the first place.
So do you all view yourselves as active participants with the companies you invest in? What else do you bring to the table other than money?
So of my 30 portfolio companies, there's probably 5 I'm very active with because it has a need for me to be there for marketing. So I'm the expert on the marketing team. We can't afford a CMO right now, so I'm it. Because they're seed money or maybe Series A.
Yeah, similar story for me. Of the 40 companies I've invested in, I've been on a board for a dozen of them or so. So some of the investments I do, I'm fairly passive, but partly it's because I know that there are other people from C10 involved that will keep their fingers on the pulse. But for a lot of the companies I invest in, I'll be on the board. I'll be, couple of the companies I'm in staff meetings every week. So it can be a very active engagement, but it isn't always.
You know, I think something that's compelling from the angel investor perspective, we have had some of our members present their portfolio and the returns, the data on their portfolio. And some of them, I won't pick on any of them here, but some of them have shown that their return is higher on those companies in which they're most active. So when they're passive, the return is lower. To your point, yeah.
It's your pitch. Oh, thank you. Your pitch has to go perfect. Your valuation, and who your team is. So your strategy really needs to be in play.
What are some of the areas, the tech or other areas, that you would really love to see a pitch come from that's not on anybody's radar right now?
Way to stump them.
Yeah.
Okay, this is partly an answer to a different question, but it's close enough that I'll work it in. I do a lot of mentor hours or office hours, and in every office hours I'll find a group of a team that's got a company that they're coders themselves, they've developed a product, they've got an MVP, and they're trying to figure out where they're going, but they don't really understand the business that they're trying to pitch this product into. They haven't lived the customer experience. So I'll talk to them. Next guy that comes up is someone who's been in the industry for 20 years. He's in his 40s. He knows exactly how the customers think, what their needs are, what their problems are. He's not a coder. He needs money to get to an MVP, and the reality is that you can't get money to get to an MVP if you're an angel. And my greatest frustration in life as an angel investor is I can never get those two parties together. I can never get the young people who've got the coding expertise and the technology sense together with senior business leaders that are coming out of the industry that their product is going into. And that combination is always what I'm looking for, and I don't find it in most of the deals I see.
I'm going to remind the folks in the back that we have seats up here. Raise your hand again if you have a seat next to you. Come on up. You can come sit. Did you have a follow-up, or are you good? Okay. Oh, do you guys have an answer for that one? We may not always hear from everyone because we want to get to lots of questions. So maybe we'll come back to that one. All right. Go ahead.
What's your preferred method of being approached?
And speak up so everyone can hear you.
What's your preferred method of approach by founders, and possibly what's your second? How do you like to be approached by us?
How do you want a founder to reach out to you? Yeah.
I'd say the easiest way for us is through CTAN, to be, as a plug for CTAN, because with our Signites, we get to see about 50 or 60 companies come through, and so for us, it's high volume. I mean, most of us, like you guys, everybody has very limited time. It's the only thing we can't get back, and so to have a high volume situation like that is where I like to go to see the pitches. And the other avenue is through current like the businesses I'm currently invested in. If they have colleagues or friends, I'll easily take that referral. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Can you explain a little bit?
And speak up so everyone can hear you.
Can you explain how the mentor hours work?
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll hit it.
My
So.
question was, if you don't mind repeating it.
So we have office hours or mentor hours at Abel's right now, and I think we have it the third Wednesday.
It's 5 or 6 times a year.
Oh, right.
Between funding cycles.
It's between funding cycles. It's on our website, centraltexasangel.org.
Angelnetwork.com.
That's what I said. Why am I speaking?
When did you get up this morning?
I'm not. I've been up all night.
Over here.
John, could you talk a little bit more about the MVP? You said you can't get there, not like investing in the development of the MVP.
Yeah, it's partly a supply and demand thing, but there are enough companies out there that are doing software products where they can self-fund to the point of getting some kind of a minimum viable product into the hands of first customers, or at least engagement. And unfortunately, that kind of sets the bar for everybody else. So given the fact that there are teams that can self-fund to the point of having an MVP, the MVP almost becomes the prerequisite for getting funding. And that's an unfortunate economic dynamic of the current entrepreneurial scene, but it's kind of a reality that is there, and it's kind of challenging for the entrepreneurs who are not coders themselves and can't do their own technical work.
Yeah, I'll say as a follow-up to that, if you don't have an MVP, it needs to be very clear that you have a pathway to have an MVP with how much money you're raising and the schedule and all of that. Too many times I've seen companies come through without a clear plan, and that's never going to get funded.
So you're saying there's a chance.
In the back. Yeah, go ahead.
My question is, how do you make your application for CTAN stand out so that you can get through the application process to the fit?
Yeah, so for those of you who aren't familiar with CTAN's process specifically, we have 5 funding cycles a year, and we have typically 50 to 70 companies applying per funding cycle, and all of those companies opt into one of 5 SIGs, or sector interest groups. To get from there to a pitch is the big first hurdle, and your application has to be fantastic. So some feedback from our members on what you look for when you're reviewing those decks and applications online.
It's a very big question that I probably won't be able to answer in this forum, but the funding cycle forum before the application deadlines are a very valuable tool.
They're just right after the application deadline, but
Sorry,
yeah,
that's right.
it's one of the events that you can attend, and you can get feedback. You can get feedback from members at that funding cycle forum about your application, ask for their advice on that at that event, as well as of course here.
So then you can modify your application before it goes to all of the members.
Right. We have a few days between the funding cycle forum and when we open member voting, so you can modify it based on the feedback you get in that event.
So my quickest piece of advice is the most important thing in the application is the little summary that is basically your basic business summary. And the most important thing is to convey in that what you have in the way of engagement. So if you can work that in addition to describing what you're doing in 10 words or less, that really helps, because for a lot of the kinds of businesses we look at and fund, the most important thing is how much engagement do you have already that we can use as a sounding board for our due diligence and for our investment decision.
For example, don't hesitate to let us know that you already have a lead investor or other investors, or you have a certain amount of traction. Whatever that traction is, let us know those details in that 150 characters for the summary. Business description is what it's called.
I'm passionate in energy and tech and want to get into angel investing. I'm passionate about energy and technology and want to get into angel investing in the next few years. What are a couple of mistakes I'll most likely make?
We don't have time.
The question was someone who is passionate about particular verticals, wants to get into angel investing in the next few years. What are some mistakes to avoid? And of course, Kelsey said we don't have time to cover all of those.
One of the mistakes that I easily make is, if I like you, I'm more inclined to invest in you, whether or not you have a good plan or a good idea. And so it's really hard to divest that. You know, you want to, because the person you like, you want them to be successful. You want to see them, achieve their goals. But it still may not be reality. So you got to really kind of check your emotions when you're evaluating the deals.
You have to put yourself in a position to see a lot of pitches. I mean, literally, you probably should see 100 pitches before you write your first check, or at least, which isn't hard to do. You can find venues to see 100 pitches within 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, it was 2 years before I wrote a check. So at CTAN.
Question is, what are you looking for in a team?
The best all-around players. So I want my CTO, hopefully my entrepreneur, everyone to have some experience in a startup, perhaps even an exit, And I think this is a bizarre thing, but most entrepreneurs are most successful are about 40 to 55 years old because they've had some experiences. So if your team is built that way as well, I look for a mature team.
Anything to add?
I've certainly invested in lone founders, but I prefer investing in a founding team rather than a lone founder. The problem with a lone founder, there's two. One is that it's emotionally a tough thing to do, to be a founder by yourself, because you don't get emotional support when things look crappy. The other problem is that one of the biggest risks you take building a team is making bad decisions, hiring people. So if the team is already in place, I can kick the tires on that team. Whereas if there's only the one founder and I know his business vitally depends upon him finding a good marketing guy or a good salesperson or a good technology lead, then those risks are still in the future, and that's an issue.
So I'm actually going to go back to your question on, what not to do. I'll flip that a little bit. What to do is educate yourself on everything there is to do with angel investing. And I think that's why some of our members will take anywhere from 6 months to a year or two before writing their first check, is we have a program of member education to teach angel investors all the ins and outs and to help them understand that. And I think that that's really key, is just educate yourself a lot, along with watching tons of pitches. Yeah. Next question. Go ahead.
So, first of all, thanks for participating here. But what's the typical deal scenario in terms of how much of the company the founders are expected to surrender for the angel investment, and then what are the typical ranges of dollar figures, low and high, that you invest in?
So what's interesting about your question is I just had a member the other day say, I keep hearing entrepreneurs say they're giving up a portion of their company, or to your point, surrendering. Yeah, you're selling. You're selling part of your company. So I encourage all of you to think of it that way. When you're bringing in investors, you're not giving up part of your company. You're bringing on more partners and you're selling part of your company. But that aside, I'll let folks answer.
So typically, at least in my 30 portfolios, they give a lot up at seed. So 15% equity, even if you cap it on a convertible note. And then I would always suggest that you keep about 12 to 15% per round based on raising 2 to 3 rounds. Because you have your team and then you have your pool, your option pool.
Any other perspectives?
The sweet spot for CTAN is companies that are really getting their first kind of organized in funding. So they may have done friends and family, they may have done a few convertible notes, but usually CTAN, our sweet spot is the first equity round or a significant convertible note round. And the typical parameters are on that are that the company is looking to raise, $750,000 in total. We may do half of that. And then we'll help lead them to other funding sources. And typically, the valuations are going to be in the range of, $2 to $4 million for that kind of first round. So I would push the numbers up a little bit. It probably is going to be a 20% dilution typically, but those are kind of the typical numbers that we're looking at for the rounds we do.
I'm going to go to other folks and come back to you. Go ahead.
Just wondering how do you assess coachability?
The question was, how do you assess coachability in an entrepreneur?
I think that starts with the first conversation that I have with you. If I'm giving you feedback and already you're giving me pushback on my feedback, then it's an easy sign that you're not going to be coachable.
Well said.
Anything else to add? I think that sums it up. Yeah. Go ahead.
What tend to be the most difficult conversations you have with founders or founding teams initially?
What tend to be the most difficult conversations you have with founders or founding teams? And everyone up here has had failed companies in their portfolio, so I'm sure at one stage or another you've had to have some difficult conversations.
I think for me, the most difficult conversation is when they're coming to me for a follow-on round and have not been impressed with their performance and am not willing to go to a follow-on round. For me, because I tend to get emotionally invested too, you know, and so that's a hard conversation for me to have because I really would like to have seen them succeed, but I just don't see it happening, and so it's a tough conversation.
You guys asked for any? Oh, did you want to answer?
No, I really don't.
Did you guys ask for any non-standard terms, and if so, why?
Do we ask for non-standard terms is the question. I try to help us avoid that. In a group of almost 200 individual angel investors, we can sometimes have rogue term sheets, but we try not to, but I will let them ask. Yeah, individually.
Yeah, generally speaking, if we do a convertible note round at CTAN, it's going to have a cap, a valuation cap. So expect that. That's standard. If we do an equity round, we're always going to have a liquidation preference. If it's me, I push very hard for a participating liquidation preference. But beyond that, the only issue that tends to be a cruxy kind of issue is in situations where it seems appropriate that there really should be some founder vesting. And that's probably the most problematic conversation in terms of terms is founder vesting. I think there are good reasons for it. I can certainly see founders' reluctance for it, but that's probably the area that is the biggest variable from deal to deal as we do deals with lots of companies.
Right back there in the middle. Go ahead. Yep.
Thanks for being here. Question for you is, you were talking about the first 2 years when you're going through 100 pitches before you decide to write your first check.
Can you speak up?
Before you write your first check, they were talking about the first 100 pitches that they went through as they were kind of developing their prospectus or their thesis. Could you elaborate a little bit more on kind of your process? I know you said you're across various sectors, but beyond industry areas, how you developed your initial investing prospectus and then how you, I guess, constantly evaluate that and refine that as you go.
I love your question. We just did a lunch and learn on Friday about developing an angel investing thesis. Good stuff. So hopefully it's top of mind for them.
Well, I lost a lot of money in the late 90s on the dot-coms. So it has changed radically, my thesis. And so when I started back 5 years ago, full time, I decided just to be put in small amounts, right? Usually an angel minimum is 25K. I put in that. And then 2-3 years into it, I started around 50 was my in. And now I've gone off the crazy train. But I feel like I know what I'm looking for in my thesis now.
For me, it's a general thesis. I'm looking for a company that's looking to improve the human condition. Basically, coming from a medical background, I'm looking for a product or an idea that's really going to help to improve the quality of life or the condition of life for the people that exist.
Yeah, I'll say, having been here for 4 years, I don't quite have a thesis yet, and it's something that I'll probably be developing for multiple years after.
So I kind of backed into an investment thesis, which at this point I can articulate pretty clearly, and I won't, but because it's personal, but because it would influence people to think that that's the only answer to the question. But I will say that I started as an angel investor on my own before joining CTAN, and I made pretty much every mistake in the book, putting too much money into a small number of deals rather than spreading money across a portfolio of deals, and then getting way too emotionally attached in deals so that when they needed money, I would just keep writing checks. And I lost a frightening amount of money in the first couple of deals I did, and have not gone back there after getting a little bit more discipline, and in particular joining CTAN, being a little more thorough about due diligence and having some emotional support as an investor when situations go bad with the companies I've invested in.
So I'll remind the folks in the back, if you didn't hear me before, you've come in since then, we have lots of seats up here that are just around. So I'm going to ask everyone to raise your hands again if there's a seat next to you.
Come on, people.
Come on up and join us.
That's right. It's very comfortable sitting down. Dan's right.
Go ahead.
So when things weren't going exactly as planned, the founders listened to them and they just figure out a pivot.
Can you speak up a little bit more?
Figure out a pivot basis with data. And there's going to require another round for some of the money. Should they go around you and find another investor, or should they come talk to you and have that conversation?
Hopefully they talk to us, especially if it originated with us.
I think he's speaking directly to Ryan's answer before. Okay, cool. Okay. Sorry.
You're on a roll. You're on a roll. Keep going. So yeah, I definitely like them to come speak to me about that first, to give me the opportunity to give them feedback and to potentially follow on the round. You know, if they just went around me without bringing it to me, that would be a worse situation for me. You know, and then I'd be extremely unlikely to have any interaction with that person or any of their colleagues in the future as far as investing goes if they, you know, kind of diverted around.
That said, there are members who part of their thesis is they don't do follow-on rounds. You know, they're spreading their funds around a lot of different companies with the initial, and then that's it. Even if they get diluted, they're still not doing follow-on rounds. So.
I have two questions, if it's possible. One is, what kind of returns are you usually looking for? And two, you sort of spoke to this, Dr. Murdoch, but to what degree does social impact matter? And if it does matter to you, how do you assess and measure social impact?
So for those of you in the back who might not have heard, two questions. What returns are you looking for as an angel investor? And two, speak a little bit about social impact and if that's something you consider in your investing. So, and how you measure it. Yeah.
I'll talk to the social impact part. That's kind of the main reason I started investing, so it's pretty important to me. And I think, and I'm not speaking for a lot of investors, or all the investors, but a lot of them will have a pretty big component of that just back in the back of their mind, we would hope.
To me, I don't consider it at all. So the point is that angel investors come in all stripes and sizes and orientations, and you know, you got to keep talking to angel investors until you find one that resonates with you. But to me, if something's going to have social impact, it can only have social impact if it has an economic impact and an economic basis that makes sense. Otherwise, it's something you have to just keep feeding money into. And the trick is to find a way to address social needs in a way that there are people that make money from that, because then it becomes self-sustaining. So the only real sustainability is economically sustainability. If you don't have that, you don't have anything. To your other question, though, as investors, we're going to invest in a portfolio. We'd like to get a 2 to 3x return on that portfolio, which might seem extreme, but when you consider that it usually takes 5, 6, 7 years to get that return, that only corresponds to like a 15%, 17%, you know, a compounded rate of return. The problem is if half your investments fail, it means that you need to get a 4 or 5x return on average from the other investments, which means that pretty much every deal you invest in has got to have at least the opportunity to be a 10x return. Because if you don't get if you don't have an opportunity for every investment you make of getting a 10x return, the winners are not going to average 5. And if the winners don't average 5, given that half of them are losers, you'll never make a 2 to 3x return. So you have to look for opportunities where there's a big exit opportunity that makes sense.
Good answer, John. That was a really good answer.
Go ahead. Oh, I'll get you in the back next. Go ahead.
Question about companies that have been bootstrapping for a while. Is there a such thing as they've moved a little too far for angels? Because you said $2 to $4 million valuation, but we don't have a lead investor, so we get kind of caught in that no person's land.
So the question is, can you end up bootstrapping so long that you can't land an angel investor because your valuation is too high? Our average valuation hovers between 4 and 4.5 million. So we do see deals with higher valuation, but we're not the West Coast. So you should definitely be able to really back up that valuation, because you'll get pushback on it.
Yeah, so to clarify, the $2 million to $4 million valuation number I kicked out is kind of for the typical first organized funding kind of company. But in our mix of our portfolio, we do invest in companies that are more mature, and those more mature companies do have higher valuations. So, you know, don't treat that as a self-filter.
Yeah, our members have done $10, $12 million valuations, but again, as he mentioned, it's more mature, and you have either the revenue or some other level of traction that warrants that level of valuation. There was someone in the back, and then I'll get to you. Go ahead. How much traction is enough traction to invest in?
I think for me, you know, depending on which vertical you're in, but if you can show that you actually have someone using your product, whether or not you're getting money for it, but you're getting feedback on that product, and there's either positive feedback or there is some small revenue from that, that's enough for me to take an interest, at least.
Proof of concept, pipeline of sales, maybe, you know, it's going to be 6 to 12 months out to close these bigger deals.
I'll say that even if you don't have traction, it's not necessarily we're not going to be able to get this done. You have to be able to demonstrate that you have a plan to get that traction, right? And it's kind of about telling the story of how your company is going to be successful. If you're not successful yet, which I guess if you were, you wouldn't be here, right? So be able to tell that story and get there.
Yeah, so for software products, traction kind of means an MVP in someone's hands. I do a lot of investing in companies that are hardware, you know, kind of hard tech, and it's very rare that at the stage that we invest, those companies will already have a product. But if they don't have customers they're already talking to that are kind of positively reacting to their technology capabilities and what the characteristics of this product would be, then there's really no way for us to do due diligence on it. So there has to be customers that at least are engaged with the company, even if it's pre-product.
And to the success comment, if you wouldn't be here if you weren't successful. If you don't have to raise from angel investors and you can find that success through bootstrapping, you asked about bootstrapping, then do that. You know, I don't know how many of you were here for Rosa McCormick's session on term sheets and demystifying deal terms, but one of her last comments was, if you don't have to fundraise, don't. You're giving up control of your company, and you're also, you know, if you can, like I said, if you can bootstrap, have the revenue, get to acquisition on your own, that means you and your team keep that acquisition, right? That's exciting. But that's really unusual, as you all know. Otherwise, you wouldn't be considering talking to angel investors. So.
Yes, could the members tell their preferences regarding the industries they'd like to invest? Is there any preference that, you know, you do consumer packaged goods, or you do only fintech, or you do life sciences? What areas?
So the question is, what sectors do the members invest in? And I will say more generally, because these are only 4 of almost 200 perspectives on sectors in angel investing, that we as a network, the members invest in any sector. As long as it's not a lifestyle business that can't return that 10x, any sector is fair game. But that said, each of them have their own perspectives on sectors that they prefer.
So I lean more towards a life scientist, just because that's where my knowledge base is, background in mechanical engineering and biomedical engineering. So it's where I'm comfortable. One of my benefits of being in C10 is around people who have expertise in other areas. So I've been able to, speaking of the mic. So I've been able to expand the verticals that I invest in by relying on, you know, the other members of C10. So, but I'm predisposed to life sciences.
Yeah, since I'm a new investor, my background's all hardware and software. That's primarily where I look. But again, C10 enables us to look in other areas, even if we don't know them very well.
Yeah, you were even a deal lead for a CPG company. That's right. There you go. John, you want to add to that one?
Since my business background is in semiconductors, which is fundamentally a B2B business, I pretty much focus only on B2B. My track record as an investor in consumer is like 0 for 8. So I stay away from consumer because I've proven to myself that I cannot recognize a good consumer deal.
Well, in consumer, you know, if you get to a Series B, it's hard in this town to get money for that. You're going to have to go to one of the coasts. So it's hard for an angel to get support in this town for CPG and some B2C plays. So the other three make more sense to us, the life sciences, hardware, and B2B.
That said, the Series B crunch is true across all sectors. So just about everyone looking for a Series B has to go outside of Austin at some point. Go ahead.
Yes. So let's say you come across a group, there's a founding team, you have an MVP, you have sales, you have hundreds of customer feedback with massive potential. What is really going to turn you over and write that ship? Say everything looks right, everything sounds good, but what is really going to make you want to roll the dice and jump off?
Well, with that scenario, I think I am. I'm on board. No, no.
The entrepreneur, right?
For me, it's the entrepreneur, but you know, if I have 5 checks on my list and those are the first 5 of my priority, then I'm probably writing a check because I'm only putting in 50, right? So I have to spread the portfolio for my success. So you've checked all my boxes.
I will say that even if it's in your head that you have all those things, you have to be able to communicate it to us, which is not, that is the challenge, right? And so being able to do that within a pitch of 6 minutes or within a set of slides or within a 1-page piece of paper, that's very difficult.
And on top of that, defensible. So when we go into deep dive due diligence, is our due diligence going to prove out what you're claiming, that all 5 of those are that strong? Yeah. Go ahead.
Sort of a follow-on question to that. You have a good team, let's say that they have shown, they've done their homework, they have good market validation, they've shown there's a customer need, you believe that their solution will address that customer need. In that situation, what are some of the questions that you would ask to find out about that defensibility in terms of like what they can do? If it's a great idea, somebody else is going to jump on board. How can they, you know, what are some of the key things that you're looking for and asking to find out about their defensibility?
John's got this. I know he does.
So there's a kind of a second tier of issues then you would start poking into. One is competition, because I don't like investing in companies that are in a foot race with 3 other people. I'd like them to basically have something that's truly unique. So the next layer of considerations is competition, intellectual property protection, really validating the market size, because you may claim that the market is X big, but you know we've got to be convinced of that. So even with that kind of first level, you know, there is a second tier of questions that we'll get to in our due diligence process after we've down selected to the companies that we're interested in, and then all those questions will come up. And more or less, those are kind of knockout questions. If as you say, you've got a business that has got good traction, the product seems solid, we can talk to customers, the customers love it, then you're now in the process of, okay, what are the things that are hidden under the rock that might kill this deal because we already like it?
You know, I think one resource that might be helpful for a lot of you who are curious about those deep dive questions is on our website under entrepreneurs, there's a due diligence checklist. And that's everything that we ask for at a certain stage in our process. So it's not necessarily all the questions you'll get asked, but it's everything that we're asking you to give us so that we can begin that process. And it's long, but if you start preparing for that, regardless of whether you're going through CTAN or some other angel network or going to VC or just individual angels, if you start preparing that before you're ready to start fundraising, I think you'll have a leg up on a lot of other folks. Go ahead.
So as entrepreneurs, we were looking for that quick no or that decisive yes. Give us some behind, give us some inside baseball, how we can avoid negative
So he's asking about entrepreneurs are looking for investors who can say a quick no or a decisive yes, and give us some behind the scenes look on what that looks like. So I would challenge that very few investors are going to say a quick no, especially VCs actually, because if they tell you no up front and 6 months later you've just improved 110%, they want another look and they've already told you no. Uh-oh. So it's actually unusual to just get a complete no. And you also won't see that from CTAN. We will say the members haven't voted you forward, but that's not a no. That means you're not ready yet. Maybe you will be. And a lot of the companies who come through our process and get funded actually have gone through it once before and have taken all the feedback that they've gotten from that, come back and get funded.
In our 160 portfolio companies, there are several that got 2 no's and went through our cycle, and they're still in our portfolio.
Yeah, but that's partly because there's a group, and even if it's a no for some people, it might be a yes for others. I think every angel investor, when they see a pitch, it's already no in their mind 80% of the time, 3 minutes in. So when I see a pitch, I'm listening for reasons to go no, because I see so many pitches, I see so many deals. I've got to quickly get down to the sensible handful that I'm really going to do a deep dive into. So as I'm watching the pitch, I'm already thinking no before the pitch is over most of the time, just because it doesn't appeal to me for one reason or another. The trick for the entrepreneur is to actually perceive that no is there. Because we want to be nice. We don't want to tell you your baby's ugly. So we're going to say no in all kinds of soft and subtle ways, and you just have to hear it and move on. Because if someone isn't clearly engaged and excited about your deal, they're not going to write a check. You need to move on and find another angel to talk to.
I think to that effect too, if I'm interested, I'm asking you more questions. And so, if you're finding that I'm not asking you many questions and you're driving the conversation, probably not that interested.
Okay. Raise your hand if you haven't had a chance to ask a question yet, and would like to. Okay, go ahead.
All the pressure now. Can you all hear me back there?
I'll repeat it if not.
Okay, good, thank you. This question is going to be primarily for Ryan and for Kelsey, although you're welcome to jump in. But seeing as you said that you focus on the marketing and that you do look for social impact, how important are current trends of awareness and so in social justice issues in social media to you? There's a million problems with the world and someone's trying to fix all of them. Do you need it to be cool to be involved?
I don't need it to be cool. I need it to be real. I need it to see that it's going to really have an effect. There's lots of things that will pose themselves as a social impact, but when it comes down to it, they're not going to make a bit of difference in what's actually happening in the world. And so I think that's the big differentiator for me. I don't care about trends. I care about the story and how you're going to get there and whether or not it's actually going to happen.
I spent the years between the late 90s and 5 years ago doing social impact. So I kind of done that already. So my marketing is for profit now. Big money profit.
Okay. Go ahead.
What's your advice on how to manage the courtship from the first time you get pitched to getting that check?
Be responsive. What's the advice on managing the courtship from the first time you pitch to getting that check written? Yeah. As an entrepreneur, be responsive. Others?
Well, and you need to take initiative of that process. You can't be passive about it. If you're passive about it, you won't get anywhere. So, be aware of the names of people you talk to that for whom your deal resonates with, because even in our process, you may not proceed down the process through our various voting rounds, but if you find a couple of people that are really excited about what you're doing, you might be able to get some, convertible note funding from them that allows you to come back 6 months down the road, and that's you know, and then you'll be ready and you'll get a bigger response. But you can't be passive. That's basically the short of it.
We know that all entrepreneurs don't want to fundraise, they don't enjoy it, and you have to get back to business. But it's critical when you make the connections, follow up until you hear a no or it's likely to turn yes, because that's your first job, is to get your company funded.
And I also want to add that when you're responding to questions, of which will be a lot of questions, you want to make sure you're clear and concise and not rambling.
And you'll hear the same questions over and over. But that's one of the tests, right? Are you answering those questions in a similar manner? Or are your answers different every time? That's one of the tests in due diligence. Hence, how about it back here in the corner? Go ahead. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the voodoo of financial projections? How much detail you want to see? What type of things you look at? You know, the level. I mean, we all know they're wrong. None of us can read the future, right? But what do you like to see, and how do you like to see it formatted?
John.
So I like to see two things. I like to see a 5-year revenue forecast. I won't believe that revenue forecast, and that's okay. I'm mostly going to use it as something I'm going to ask you questions about and try to understand whether you understand how to build a reasonable model of how the world is going to play out for you. So that's one thing. It's kind of the 5-year numbers that tell me whether this is a company that can scale in its market space to a point of an exit within a reasonable timeline. The other thing I want to see is kind of a 12-month, fairly detailed budget so that I know that the money that you're raising from me is actually going to get you to somewhere that matters. Because the first risk that every investor takes when they invest is that the company actually doesn't have enough money to get to a proving point. So you don't want to invest in a partial round that doesn't get the company where it needs to go, but you also don't want to invest in an entrepreneur who's actually underappreciated how much money it's going to take to get him to where he needs to be.
Just a quick note. You mentioned that we all know that the projections are BS, right? But you better believe there's a pathway to where they're not. And you better be able to explain that to us.
Someone who hasn't asked, again, I'll pick on folks who haven't asked a question yet. Way in the back. Go. Aspects that are polarizing between pursuing angel or VC for your seed funding?
I only know of a couple seed VCs, so I think 85% of all seed monies are filled by angels.
I don't know of polarizing aspects. I think that generally money is money as long as you've brought in investors who are a good fit for you and your company. We've gone into rounds alongside VCs, so again, in some cases it may depend on the particular angel investor because there are some angel investors who look for deals that won't require VC funding. So, go ahead. Indeed, we have, the question was, would CTAN or our members or angel investors generally, I think, consider investing in a cancer drug that's going to take a lot of resources. We have invested in life science pharma companies that need a lot of powder and a lot of rounds. And in fact, we have 2 IPOs over the last year that are just those kind of pharma companies. One was a reverse IPO and one was a straight up IPO. So yeah, we have and we will again.
Speaking of IPOs, do founders that want to go for an IPO turn off angel investors, or do you have specific exit strategies that are preferred?
Are you open to taking an acquisition if you get a great one? Yes. Or are you only going the IPO route? I think would be one question. Yeah.
That's it, yeah. Right.
Yeah. Flexibility. Yeah. Flexibility, indeed. Go ahead. This is where the voodoo comes in. No one really knows how to set a pre-money valuation, right?
Yeah, going back to John's point, we need to be able to get a return off that valuation.
I think it's just not being ridiculous with your numbers, honestly. You know, if you have no revenue, you have no, product, and you're coming in with a $6 or $8 million valuation, I'm not even going to listen to what you're saying. Honestly, I prefer to be in the $2 to $4 million range where there's some proof of product or proof of concept. Don't necessarily need you to have revenue, but if you're coming in at a higher valuation with nothing to show for it, I'm not buying.
We are all consistent on that. If it's too high, no one's looking at it in our group.
And I don't think that's CTAN alone. I think most angel investors. Go ahead.
Another question about how many of your companies coming in already have an investment banker helping them? Or are they really just doing it on their own?
The question was, how many of the companies coming into our process have an investment banker already working with them? And I would say, for the most part, very few. We don't work with brokers. Our entity, for those who don't know, CTAN is a nonprofit member-based organization, very volunteer-driven. So when brokers contact us, and those are frequently investment bankers, we just let them know anyone can apply. It's not something where you need an intro from an investment banker. Yeah. That said, a lot of our portfolio companies will have investment bankers as they're getting inquiry for acquisition inbound. Yeah.
Just
sure.
in terms of setting it up, where it's less work for you, don't you feel like there would need to be kind of clean up with the presentation and the books and all that?
Do you want to repeat the question?
Well, the question was whether an investment banker could help having a better pitch, a better deck, better book. Yeah, it's true that they certainly would, but for most companies, I think it'd be a mistake to have that kind of relationship with an investment bank too early. For one thing, it's expensive. They're not going to do that for free. They always have some kind of an upfront cash payment, and it's usually substantial. And you probably don't want to get married to an investment bank too early anyway, because the most important thing about an investment bank is you really only get one chance to pick the right one, because all of the terms of those relationships tend to be very sticky. And you don't want to make that decision too early. So I would avoid it. Now, if you're talking about someone who's more in an advisor kind of role, and you want to have someone that's in a consultant advisor kind of relationship to the company, that's fine. But a real investment bank is usually something you should do later, but not ridiculously later.
Go ahead.
Got a kind of complicated situation. I have a company based in the U.S. with a company that we're partnering with in Europe. So we're both building the same product. They've probably built out to like 80% of it. We're starting to add code. So we're getting all the legal stuff figured out for that. But my question is, they have about 5,000 MRR. We have like under 1,000 right now. And we wanted to raise some money to help both sides build scale. So the question is how do we navigate that? Because it's a European company with our company. Should we form a joint entity in the U.S. first before we do that? Yeah, just curious from an investor standpoint, especially angels, because we're not going to be looking to raise too big of a round at first. But from an angel investor standpoint, what's the best move for us?
That's sticky. I stay away from those. John, do you have anything?
Well, generally, most of our members are not investing in entities that are overseas. But since you have an American entity formed, I think that helps. I don't know. John, have you ever done?
Yeah, no, I haven't made an investment in a company that's got an offshore nexus like that. I would say, though, generally, you're going to find that people are open to have that conversation, but you got to set the hook first anyway. So, when you're out talking to angels, don't start with that. Set the hook first and get them excited about what you're doing, and then go into that and find a way to talk about it so it's actually an advantage. It basically means you're going to have a marketing team in Europe as well as a marketing team in the U.S., and that could be positioned as something that's pretty cool. But I do think you have to get some advice from an attorney on what are the issues that a U.S.-based investor is going to have, because when we do our tax returns, there's all these funny little check boxes that are, have you invested in a foreign entity? And I don't want to have to check those boxes.
So we have 15 minutes left, and I want to make sure we get to as many more questions as possible. I'm going to ask that only one member answer where we can. Who's had their hands up for a while and has not had a chance to ask their question? Go ahead.
I just have a quick context question on the network. So I'm not really that familiar with it. I'm picking up. I'm gleaning what you guys are about. But is the network really kind of like it's a consortium of individual investors, nonprofit network? Do you guys, through this application process, are you pre-vetting and pre-qualifying applicants for your investors that they kind of come together, go through this speed dating exercise?
So the question is kind of how this works at CTAN, what's the secret sauce? It's actually all spelled out on the website under the entrepreneurs page, but in short, our staff does not make any of those decisions of which companies move forward except to filter out lifestyle companies. And the members are voting at each stage. So they have full control over which companies are moving forward. I don't know if that kind of covers it, but it's a very structured process. Essentially, we do everything together. For those, a lot of our members invest outside of CTAN. So maybe a third to half of their deals or 3/4 are CTAN deals and the rest are outside. But we do everything together, from sourcing the deal flow and hosting pitch events to the due diligence, all the way up until the time to sign the closing docs and invest. They're doing that on their own.
And so, quick follow-up, just right quick. So what qualifies for an investment? Is there a minimum number of investors or a minimum threshold of dollars committed from those investors that say, we're going to go forward with this investment to this company?
The question was, is there a minimum for us to invest? Only if we're leading would we consider there, for us to negotiate terms and lead a deal, are we looking at there being a minimum dollar amount and number of investors in? But otherwise, side deals happen. John alluded to that earlier. There's no minimum. Yeah. Go ahead.
So for the hardware side, how sophisticated does your proof of concept need to be in order to really pitch it well to
For hardware, how sophisticated does your concept have to be to pitch to an angel? Proof of concept.
I would say that you've got to have something. We actually recently had a company come through that despite a bunch of discussion up front at the funding cycle forum, they didn't actually have enough of a proof of concept at all. And so, and not only that, but they didn't have a proof of concept and they didn't have anything saying what they did have, right? So I don't think there's necessarily a minimum, but you need to be able to show your idea, how you're going to get to a proof of concept if you don't have it.
John, do you have a follow-up?
It's lightning round.
Yeah, that's right. It is lightning round. Okay, I saw your hand. Yeah, go ahead.
John mentioned a little bit ago that he'd like to see kind of a 12-month breakdown of where the initial funding is being put towards. I was wondering if there are certain areas that you guys prefer to see that initial investment put towards, or areas that you guys are like, I don't want my company spending money in that area. Specifically for B2C.
Use of funds specific for B2C.
I'll take this. When the C-suite has a $150,000 salary, I will not look at you.
Okay. Next. Go ahead.
For some of the companies that you've invested in that have already gone to market and achieved that initial success, what are some of the more difficult coaching challenges that you help coach through as those companies are scaling from an operational standpoint?
Scaling coaching, you love the coaching.
I'm not coaching in that phase, though.
Anyone coaching in the scaling phase?
I don't have any companies that have made it there yet.
Same here.
I think we'll have to pass on that one, and we'll maybe circle back afterwards. Go ahead. Oh, actually, right behind you, and then we'll get to you.
So what is an appropriate C-suite table?
Well, if they're in the option pool, hopefully they're betting on that, and I would say 75 to 125, depending on their experience.
Some will say 60. You're going to get a different answer from everyone.
If you're looking at a company that's focused on something like a disruptive technology that's pre-revenue and or pre-revenue, how much of a product market fit analysis are you looking at before you go too much into, spending too much time into analyzing the market versus moving forward and getting first to market or scaling the product idea? If you don't have a product market fit, you don't know that you've got a disruptive product. I mean, really, if the product is not addressing a very specific market opportunity, it's not investable. So technologies for technology's sakes do not make investable companies. You've really got to have a technology that's addressing a problem that people care about and they're willing to spend money to solve. So well, you have to have done it. You've got to be able to bring to us people that aren't you, that can tell us that they've talked to you and see the value of what you're doing and that they're really excited about it. And you've got to be able to put some numbers to the size of the opportunity and what kind of market, impact you think you can have.
Even better, get one of them to pay for your product. And I'm sorry, we had one in the back that's had his hand up for a while. Enterprise product, what are some of the things you can do to get customers to sign up for the beta product?
Well, my enterprise portfolio, they all are charging for their beta and a very low introductory price. But the days of free trial, you might have 14 days, but most of those enterprise solutions take a lot longer to implement. So the pipeline, right? You're going to have to get as many in the pipeline because we have the 5% early adopters. So, you know your curve, and they come in within a few weeks of exposure.
Okay. Next. Hands up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a product that still got enough pivots in there for both the market and feature set of the product. I'm curious how much to talk about that kind of thing in presentations to show some future vision, and at the same time how much to leave off of presentations so as to not give too much.
I will say if you show too much future vision for other sectors or other markets you can go into, you're going to look fractured. And you need to prove that you can make it in one market before you can say, yes, we have a fit for other markets, but we're going to focus on this as our threshold market to start.
Good answer, Claire.
Yeah, again, there's kind of a generic answer to that question that the context doesn't matter. If you're talking about a plan B, it means you don't have confidence in plan A. And even if there are multiple potential markets for your product, you've got to have a clear strategy as to which is your beachhead market, which one you're going after first and why you think you can penetrate that market better. And if it makes sense to be talking about the other markets, at the early stage, they're not what the survival of your company is going to come from what happens with your beachhead. So you can talk about those other opportunities as to set context for what the total market opportunity is, but your viability and your success is really going to come from, do you pick the right beachhead that you can really penetrate quickly, and that's really the conversation that everyone's going to want to have. Everything else is kind of nice to have, or at worst, a distraction.
That's exactly why we have mentor hours. We have investor mentor hours 5 or 6 times a year. Come to that, and you can get feedback from some of the members before you're ready to fundraise.
And
yeah,
they
absolutely.
always fill up immediately. Yeah. So make sure you look at the calendar and see when it's
sign up when it. We're opening them a month before the date, so just sign up right away. Go ahead.
From application to check, how long does that process?
Application to check ideally would take 10 weeks. But it never does, right? Everything gets, once we get to due diligence, that can take a while depending on how long it takes us to reach your customers or how responsive you are with materials we've asked for. And closing, of course, once it's in the hands of the attorneys, that's out of our hands, so that can take a while, yeah.
For due diligence, we have a lot of different kinds of data. Is access to our data room, which they've organized in a systematic manner, sufficient, or do you much prefer a due diligence report that's consolidated, summarized, etc., which would require
Question is on due diligence, should you have a data room and would we like access to that? Does that make more sense than maybe a due diligence report? We do our own deal memo if we get to that stage in the process. So yeah, a data room is fine, but we have a deal room on Procedure where we ask you to upload your materials. So you would just put everything there. If you want to have supplemental materials with another link, you can let us know that as well. Next. All right, we have about 5 minutes left, and I want to get to as many questions as I can, especially anyone who has a burning question who hasn't had a chance to ask one. Go ahead.
You guys do NDAs before your mentor night?
We do not do NDAs at all. I've never seen one ever. I know of very few angels and VCs that do NDAs. Anyone have a different answer for that? Okay. No, we don't do NDAs and due diligence either, although there are things you can choose not to share that are trade secret, but you can address that.
Yeah, the only time we ever do an NDA, and this is pretty rare, is when there's a very specific exposure issue. So if you make the case for a very specific exposure issue, we'll listen, but generally speaking, the NDAs just don't make sense, don't work.
Go ahead.
Are there any major changes you guys are noticing in angel investing that you think the founding team should be aware of?
I'm going to repeat the question. Any major changes in angel investing that the founding team should be aware of?
Not yet. The economy's still good.
The thing I've been interested to watch over the last several years is that angel investing has been growing from the angel side, but also startup activity has been growing phenomenally. And as I watched that, I expected the quality to go down as the quantity went up. And oddly enough, the first order, I'm not finding that to be the case. I think there are just more people coming out and looking at doing, entrepreneurial things. The weird thing is that I've seen aggregate numbers for the economy that say that entrepreneurship is actually going down, which, looking at the world as an angel investor, is incomprehensible. I don't know where that data comes from.
Mark?
Yeah, Claire, that's a great question.
Well, most of the folks up here have had experience doing this, but we are members of the Alliance of Texas Angel Networks. When we lead a deal in particular, we will offer to syndicate your deal to other angel networks around the state. But increasingly, we're doing inbound and outbound syndication with our peer angel groups around the nation. So the angel groups that are equally as active as CTAN, because we are one of the top 5 most active in the nation.
So we'll help get your round closed.
Yeah. That's always the goal, especially if we're leading. We want you to close your round, right? Go ahead.
Do you have a typical exit time horizon, and if so, do you share that initially with the founder?
Typical exit time horizon, and do you share that with the founder? I will say that the national averages are tending around 7 to 10 years, but at CTAN it's different. Anyone want to speak to that? Your expectations?
I just think it goes along with an individual thesis. I won't hold on to something typically for 7 to 10 years. I want a 4 to 6 year And I do wait it, right? There are some pharma companies and devices I have to wait for, but then I see some quick acquisitions also.
Okay.
Real quick, on creating your exit strategy, is it better to have several solid plans or just one? Do you all prefer?
I personally like multiple.
Okay. Anyone else? Last call for a final question. Are we past time? Woohoo! All right. So thank you all again for joining us. I will say real quickly, I know some of you got here after the intros, so I want to reintroduce. This was Kelsey August, Dr. Ryan Murdoch, Liang Shaw, and John Paulos, also doctor, PhD doctor. So thank you again for joining us.